Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fiction genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Mist. A very good episode which takes place entirely in the hospital after Kevin and the group gets Brian to the hospital and everything. He checks out okay, but a lot of stuff went down this episode. I'm just going to break everything down. Obviously, we see kind of a little bit more of the intimacy between Mia and Brian kind of come out a little bit to the fact that she's so concerned and broken down because she's even blaming Kevin. She's like, if anything happens to him, it's your fault. He's like, what? How's it my fault? I'm not the one that shot him. But it's like basically everything unfolded the way it did because of Kevin, because he lied to that dad about his son and everything. It just led to things spiraling to this particular event. Plus, Mia's just upset because at the same time, it's like Brian is hurt. He might potentially die. It's just like you need someone to blame. But at the same time, it's like you can't see it being Kevin's fault because he didn't take action when he needed to. If he had just shot the dude when he when he had an opportunity to, none of this would have happened. But at the same time, if he was more truthful from the very beginning, once again, it's just like he tried not to he wanted to put himself in that, he could imagine being in that dad's shoes because he was in that same situation himself, worried about your child. And, he didn't want to strip that hope away from him. But it's like, I guess it's a situation where it's like, would he have been better off knowing from the very beginning? It's hard to say. So, but at the same time, it's also because Brian's the only person that Mia's gotten close to. He's confided in her about the whole no memories things. He knows about her whole withdrawal situation and kind of being possible quote unquote a junkie and everything, but he's still nice to her, he's kind to her. He hasn't blabbed it to other people in the group like Adrian or Kevin, but it's still a situation there's something there, but she kind of pushes him away because it's she's not used to people being so nice to her. So she's like, I'm not used to you being nice, so just for now rest. Basically kind of almost we can work on us later on. But she was kind of going back on that herself because she got him a beer and everything because there was something a bond forming between them until she met the other dude claiming his name is Brian Hunt. So then it puts everything in perspective. Well, you're really Brian Hunt. It's yeah, what happened to you? Because you're in this hospital too. It's well, I got beat up by a dude named Jonas. And it's well, why did that dude Jonas do it to you? It's I don't know. Which there I have my own theories about. But really quickly, you see what that does. Immediately, it changes everything in Mia's head because I think in that one moment, because Mia had such a high expectation for who Brian is, because Brian has shown himself to be a very nice, caring guy, but in that moment it got shattered because she thought okay, at the very least there are some good people. He's nice to me, he's a nice, good person. Now it's oh man, he's a liar, because it starts making her think, oh, he's manipulating me as well as the rest of the group. He's just trying to pretend like he's a good guy when in actuality he's a bad guy. Even if I myself am a bad person, and maybe that's why she latched onto Brian so much, is because I'm a bad person. She knows she's done some bad things. Maybe she wanted to kind of be around his goodness to kind of possibly rub off on her, kind of make her feel okay about herself. I don't, maybe easily could be me just reading too much into it. I tend to do that anyway. But it's just that moment of she had such faith in him and it was just broken in that instant. I mean, granted, we don't have the full story of that situation. So, but like I said, she just felt like they were taking advantage he was taking advantage of not just the group, but her. And she was almost changing. She's no, everyone's in this for themselves. Because even Kevin, the only thing he really cares about is his family. He doesn't care about us. Everyone's in this for themselves. So it seems like Mia kind of goes back to that mentality when she ends up stealing the car keys from, Adrian and bouncing, because she even says it to herself, your mom says that you will always be lonely no matter what in life. You'll always be lonely. That basically don't rely on others, because all people basically telling that Adrian, don't get close to people because they're just going to use you for their own good, and she leaves. So, which is very heartbreaking that just it turned like that. I mean, because the fact of the matter, it's understandable being presented with that situation, plus Brian's whole amnesia thing is now, like I said, it puts everything he said into as in her mind as a lie. But granted, we don't know full story yet. Maybe I believe he does have amnesia and stuff like that. He saw the uniform, which is it's actually this Brian's uniform. But what I'm guessing is because the real Brian, quote unquote real Brian, said the whole reason why Jonas did it to him is it's above my pay grade. What I immediately go is, well, obviously the military knows about this whole Mist situation, so maybe Brian was the other Brian, Jonas, maybe he found out about it and tried to stop all of this, because that's why Brian's being so tight-lipped about it, because they're all neck deep into this, because even that military guy at the mall, the only one that's left alive, even he's like, I'm a private, that's well above my pay grade. You think they really tell me what's up? It's like, he probably knows a lot more than he lets on because he knows it's going to backlash. Like, there's probably some part of him still waiting for backup. It's like, maybe there's part of his brain that's like, no. Clint was able to, was it Clint? I think so. I was able to get backup, so I don't have to worry. Just keep it cool. Don't let anything slip, because it'll come back to bite him in the ass if civilians find out the truth or whatever. Maybe this quote unquote real Brian Hunt is doing the same thing. All we see is Brian and him confronting each other at the end, like at one point in the episode, and that's the last part we see with them. Which also begs the question: maybe they have something to do with Brian or Jonas. Like I said, like we don't really know the truth in that situation. I mean, especially with everything being so, it's already a complicated enough situation, but you add in the mist on top of it, it's like you don't know what's real anymore. So part of me is wondering, like maybe they wiped his memories. Maybe it's just he suffered a big enough blow that it kind of gave him retrograde amnesia. I would assume that kind of fits in this particular situation, but nevertheless, or maybe they purposely did that so he wouldn't be able to warn people in time, so I mean, maybe that's why he was out there in the woods, because they left him for dead to be like, the mist is coming, it'll get him soon enough, everyone back out. Like, just my thoughts on it, but we'll kind of see whether or not anything comes of that later on. Then there's the whole Adrian's out of the story, where he ends up bumping into one of the football players that he bumped into at the party, and this football player was all up in his face, calling him the F word and stuff like that. It's like he's here because his mom had a panic attack and he came to get her help, but he's been stuck in the hospital ever since. But then when it came down to it, like him and Adrian in the bathroom, Adrian kisses him and he flips out and starts beating the crap out of Adrian. But then they make out, and the way Adrian makes it sound later on, he's literally like, "Oh, what happened to you?" It's like, "I had sex." So it's like they had sex. So interesting. Even though all that, like the beating the crap out of Adrian stuff, which that whole thing could be interpreted multiple ways. Maybe that whole situation with Alex, maybe he claimed it was Jay because Jay was the last person. Maybe he saw what Jay did say he did. That he carried, or at the very least, he was the last person that Adrian saw with Alex. So, but maybe he was off with the same dude that he's with this episode. Maybe he was off with him, and in the whole, being closeted situation, That's why he lashed out at Adrian, both at the party as well as beating the crap out of him this episode, just because of his own insecurities about who he is. Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe Adrian did it just because, at the end of the day, Adrian is a weirdo bastard who just likes control. I don't know. It's like, I want to look at him as the innocent kid, but there is a part of my brain that's like, immediately, I think he's guilty with the whole Alex situation, but maybe in all honesty he had nothing to do with it. Maybe he really was just trying to be a good friend and looking out for her, and he legitimately thought Jay did it because that was the last person he saw with Alex before everything went down. So, but I was thinking maybe that whole situation was him kind of punishing himself a little bit, being a sinner and all, but I don't know. Like I said, maybe it's a situation where it's like I said, I'm reading too much into certain things. So I'm just curious what that was all about. It just seemed like such an isolated thing, but maybe it'll become something more later on. But another big part of the story dealt with Mike and Kevin. Mike being Kevin's brother, who's in a hospital. He basically elaborates more about the whole mist situation of basically seeing stuff that shouldn't be there. At the very least, that the mist kind of taps into stuff it shouldn't know. Because basically some kids attacked him, and we're basically talking about some kid named Ricky that Mike knew back in the day that he used to bully and beat up, and they stabbed Mike with a rebar for it. So he's dying in an infection, so it turns into a whole situation of him wanting Kevin to kill him, but then Kevin can't do it, which kind of goes back to the whole situation with Brian last episode. Like, he couldn't pull the trigger when the time came, so it's a situation where it's like he has to prepare himself because he doesn't want to hurt anyone, but in this particular situation, especially if he wants to save his family, he might have to cross that line. That's what it kind of is what this episode was implying, and obviously it kind of pulls through with that at the end of the episode. But I'll get to that soon enough. But an interesting thing about the whole Kevin and Mike thing too was we learned a little bit more about Eve and Kevin. Kevin. For one, I figure something had to be up with the whole like situation with Mike, because like the moment like now Mike and Kevin are having beers, Eve comes in and then Mike makes some remark like, "Oh, Eve, like we never would have thought you'd be the set of, home, married, white picket fence type. Huh? Who would have guessed?" Almost kind of, a backhanded compliment. And then her and Kevin immediately have sex afterwards. So that was her trying to just kind of like push that away. So I was like, what was that about? Because at this point, it's like she's talking about the fact is like, Kevin, you know about my past. And he was like, I mean, do I really? She's like, because we heard Eve herself kind of talk about the fact is that she kind of bounced around from dude to dude when she was younger. And that's where that whole whore thing that Alex brought up before, that's where it stemmed from. And then we even learned from Eve herself that where that exactly stems from is Mike going around telling everyone about her past from when she was younger, which Kevin's familiar with, but probably doesn't know all the details. It's a part of her past that she's ashamed of. But it seems like when she met Kevin, she kind of, I don't know whether it's like a religious thing of like, oh, they got together and she became more devout. I mean, I don't know. It's not like he's like overly religious, or at the very least doesn't seem like that. But I mean, I don't know. But at the very least, he like saved, Eve possibly from her, because she used to have a thing for bad boys and kind of run with the bad boy crowd that included people like Mike. But Mike would go around still to this day calling her a whore behind her back, as well as Kevin's back, as well as even telling that to all the like parents of the students in her class, and like just smearing her name. And later on, it seems like Mike admits why. It's because he was in love with Eve. I mean, he's like, everyone was, but then it's like, here you come and you got to reach a part of her that none of us were able to reach, like her heart. She fell in love with you, so it pissed him off. So maybe that's why he was going off smearing her name, because it's a type of situation of like, oh, if I can't have her, no one will. And it's like, oh, if you're going to be with my brother, I'm going to smear your name. So, I mean, and we also found out the shocking revelation that Alex is not Kevin isn't the biological father. We never found out who the biological father was, but then my brain started thinking like, is it Mike? Is that kind of why you, like, besides just the whore thing, is that why you don't like Mike a lot too? Because it's like, Mike held that over you too, or something like that. Maybe Mike never even actually knew. I feel like he would, like, obviously with the episode end, isn't, you would think it would have come up, but, maybe Mike isn't the dad. I mean, maybe what we'll end up finding out, the twist is that Connor himself is the dad. I mean, because let's not forget, he's made comments about, Eve, like, was it like an episode or two ago? He made all those comments about Eve and her particular situation, like kind of referencing this. So it's like, maybe it'll be him. But I mean, it's so sad because Kevin was so close to saving his brother. He performed the surgery and everything. The doctor told him over the walkie-talkie and everything. Was able to get it all done. But the moment he started pushing his brother through, but it also seemed like the mist was affecting him on some level too, because it's like when he was going through it, he was spitting out blood a little bit. His fingernails started bleeding. So maybe the mist had already infected him to a certain extent, or maybe because as we know, the mist once again kind of has its like, I don't know, the mist seems like it affects different people in different ways. Like maybe the reason why it hasn't really affected Kevin so far, because that's the only person that really hasn't affected. Hasn't really affected Brian too much either. I mean, it's probably easier to not affect Brian considering the fact that he doesn't know anything. Maybe that'll change with his whole like situation with meeting the quote unquote real Brian. But have we seen it mess with Mia's head a little bit? I don't think it's messed with Adrian's yet. So, but like there's something there inside of people that is tapping into kind of the darkness in their hearts, the darkness that they kind of hide away. And so maybe Kevin doesn't have anything in him that he's hiding away that the mist can really tamper with, because it really hasn't messed with him, even though he's been out in it multiple times. But what I'm thinking is maybe it tapped into that. Maybe it was kind of reflecting, oh, you did all this bad stuff to people when you were younger, bullying them, beating the crap out of him and stuff, and maybe his body was reflecting that. Or maybe it's just like, once you've kind of been exposed to the mist for an extremely long amount of time, like the mist kind of does what it wants to. Like it seems like it targets specific people. So maybe from the very beginning it had Mike marked, but now that he was out of the mist, he was safe for a while. But then the moment he went back into the mist, it's like, oh, we got you now. Like maybe it buries itself deep into your skin. Like the moment he got stabbed, maybe it stayed inside of his body, but the moment he entered more mist, it started kind of corroding his body. That's the best way I can I think of kind of phrasing it. Another thing too is like still that boundary of you not being able to tell, like, because the mist seems like there's real stuff in the mist, but there's also stuff that's in your head. But the whole leech thing, I was thinking like, okay, when it's all said and done, what we're going to find out is that it was all in their head, and Kevin basically killed his brother for nothing. But it was real enough to him to the point that he felt it and saw it, and the same thing for Kevin. I mean, he ended up telling Kevin, is like, you have to do this. Like, you stay here trying to save me. You're supposed to be getting to Alex and Eve, so, you know, you go do that, so... And Kevin had to ultimately, I mean, he did it because it's like his brother would have died, sure, but he wasn't going to leave his brother there to be in all that pain. It's like, because it seems like that, because, I mean, it came up earlier, like him and Kevin were on good terms before, but it wasn't until the whole, what Eve revealed to him that he cut off all ties with Mike, why they were at such odds, so. And it kind of bounced back and forth between her and even Kevin having a conversation of like, I'd do anything for you. So even, you know, killing his own brother so he'd not be weighed down and be able to get back to him. I mean, granted, it's going to be pretty hard considering the fact is that Mia drove off with the only vehicle that you have, the only vehicle that's probably nearby that actually works. So a very sticky situation the group has found themselves in. And Mia's definitely found herself in a very messed up situation because now you're on your own. Don't have any weapons either, so... As we've seen already, the mist has already gotten to you once before, so maybe that makes you more liable to be affected by it. Who knows? Like I said, at least the way Natalie puts it, it seems like the mist has a mind of its own, and at the very least, it has a reason for doing everything that it does. So, like I said, a very good episode, and I'm very interested to see where next week's episode takes us, like with these new developments, especially the two Brian situation. I'm definitely interested to see whether any of my thoughts about that came true or whether I was completely wrong about it. Good chances are I'm completely wrong, but we'll find out next week, won't we? But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.